Morning, gang. It's a beautiful day in Georgia, March 7th, 2017, and I need to get some work done on the 68 coupe. As I've shown in other videos, I've done a bunch of work on this car, all new suspension, front sheet metal, aprons, core support, floor pans, torque boxes, and obviously a rebuilt engine. And I've also converted it to disc brakes and power steering. The disc brake setup is CSRP, and I did several videos on that. Power steering is Borgeson, and I'm also adding vintage air kit. This car was an original AC car, but obviously I'm not going to use the original setup. I'm going to go with vintage air. So today's project is to get some work done on the body, because obviously the goal is to get it in paint. I already have the paint. This is the original color, and that's what I'm going back with. So in order to get there, I need to take care of a few things. One of those is this drip rail. Now, I've done other videos. I did a video on a 65 Mustang where I basically bought a whole car just to get a drip rail. The car was junk, totaled, but the only piece that was good was a drip rail. Fortunately, this one isn't as bad. It's a lower section. I'm not sure how far I'm going to go yet, but I will start separating until I find a good area, and I will split the drip rail and cut that section out. Now, unfortunately, they don't make a drip rail assembly for the coupes. They make them for the fastbacks, and I have a pair from what would be a 68 fastback. Now, the part number here is from Dynacorn, and then this is the part number from Mustangs Unlimited, where I got it from. So what I'll have to do is obviously cut off whatever section I need from one of these drip rails to repair this section. That's the only way I can figure out to do it. If they made a whole drip rail, I don't know that I'd even cut the whole thing off, because the rest of it is intact, in good shape. And the only reason this one is bad, most likely, is because this was a vinyl roof car, and it causes a lot of problems with moisture. So to do this, first thing I'm going to do is take the door off, and then I'm also going to remove the seat. I don't want any chance of burning up the nice new interior that's in there. But the door itself has a, well, not the door, but the door hinge has a problem. This lower hinge, the rod is, or the bushing is worn out, so the door drops when you open it. So along with that, I'm also going to replace the pin and the lower bushing. And I will probably do some repairs. I know the previous owner had started cutting out some bad metal on the lower section of the door, and you can kind of see how thick all this stuff is on here. So the door is going to get stripped regardless, but I will work on repairing any rust that I find as well. So that's the plan, and I'm going to get started on it. Like I said, pull the door and start getting things out of the way. Well, I got the door off and seat out, and after looking this over a little more, I think I'm going to have to get some more bushings. The upper and lower is bad on this lower hinge, and I may end up doing the upper hinge as well. It doesn't have a lot of play, but it does have a little play, and it may be worth it while it's apart. Now, I plan to do this, hopefully, with the hinges still mounted on the car, and that way I have a support structure and I'm not chasing this thing around. I can drive out this pin. So at this point, I'm not going to worry about the hinges. I am going to focus on getting the strip rail done. To do that, I've got to get this seal out, and then the stainless trim that holds the seal along the door opening, or the window opening. So to start with, there's a little tab on the end of the seal that goes into the A-pillar. Right there, if you can see it. And you know, it's just a small little screw, but that's the first step in taking out that seal. Now, depending on how well somebody has put this in, it may just pull right back out. And thankfully, this one does. And I'm not gonna reuse this seal. I'm gonna replace it, obviously, but that one came out pretty nice. Usually they're glued in there, and you have to fight a lot with it. So at this point, I will remove these screws that run the full perimeter, and hopefully get them all out without a problem. I have had issues before where there's some, looks like there's not even some in there. So this has been worked on, and they didn't put these screws back in. And usually there's a tape on the back side of these, so you have to be careful taking those loose. You may want to get a putty knife and get behind there and kind of wiggle it loose as you go. So let me get those screws out of the way and see how that goes. Alright, all the screws come out fairly easily. And so now I'm just going to get behind, and this forward section actually separated rather easily as well. But I'm going to take a putty knife and gently pry behind as I move along. Because it's easy to bend these, and there's no reason to if you just take your time and separate them. Now what you'll find as you do this, there are little metal tabs sticking up. And those are kind of an alignment tab. There's a couple there, there's one there. You can see when I pull that off. So when you're pushing your putty knife, that's what you'll run into, is those little tabs. There's also one down here towards the bottom, where I started. So just be careful and take your time. No reason to damage these pieces. And then you can see where there's previous primer or something on them in a few places. Generally you can polish those up pretty easily. This is stainless steel. There's some overspray down there. And this will clean up pretty easily. Again, it is stainless steel. It's one of the good things about these pieces, because they're not going to rust. Alright, so I have the trim removed and it has exposed everything that I need to see. And basically it is, bad probably up into this range, which is only 6 or 8 inches. But I'll probably go a bit higher, maybe 10. Now before I do anything, I'm going to take a measurement, or I did already, from this point of this up to this point right here, and I just picked a number. I picked 18 inches. That way I have a reference to know from this point down is 18 inches. That way you're not guessing whenever you cut this thing off and say, hey, where was I at? Where does it need to be? So now I can see, the sun's probably going to block some of this, but you can see how rusted it is, but it's really isolated. It doesn't go very high at all. It's probably 6 or 8 inches really. But what I'll do is I'll probably pick a point somewhere between these two screw holes and create a line, and then I'll bare the spot welds down. I'll grind out the heads of the spot welds, separate those, and then cut off that piece, and then basically just reverse that. I'll get a measurement, cut off what I need from the new piece, and section that in. Now the thing is, I'll be welding it obviously, so I'm going to weld a seam that'll come up, and then I'll have to weld this. Now the nice part is this edge is going to be covered by the trim, so you really can't see it when you're done. But that's where I'm going. Let me get started on that. Now, as I've said before, I take a sanding disc and I bare the paint off where the spot welds are. And you can see the circles show you where these are. There were a couple down here, and I've already started grinding those. So let me show you what I do for that. Of course, I've got a dust mask on, that's why I sound a little funny. And I will put on my safety glasses and hearing protection. And I'm using what I call a ziz wheel, or it'll be a cutoff wheel. And I'm just going to grind the top of that weld off. So once I get those out of the way, then it would be a matter of taking, in this case I'm going to use a putty knife, and I'm going to get behind it and work that loose. So let me get a mallet and show you that. You may have to hit it a few times with the grinder. But there you can see how it will separate. So now I'll do that the rest of the way up. But the next step I'll do is cut off or make a cut line. I've already marked it. And let's take my Ziz wheel and cut through that. Try not to block your view. And of course I'll take my time. I'll have to move the camera out of the way and cut my line as close as I can. I'm gonna try not to hit this flange here. So I've got some older Ziz wheels or cutoff wheels that are smaller diameter, and I'll probably use those to get all the way into the deeper cut. Well, that worked out pretty good. I was able to cut my line pretty far in, and I had a little tiny corner hanging on, but once I separated these other welds, I could rotate this metal and just bend it, break that off. So now I will clean up this area here, get rid of any more pitting, and obviously treat all that. You can see there was some existing rust between the two panels, but there's nothing really I can do about that. I'm not going to remove that whole drip rail, but what I will do is expose the rest of it, clean off this seam sealer, and then treat that. I'll put a rust seal down inside there and hopefully get it down in far enough that it affects this or will stop anything else from continuing to rust. So at this point I'm going to take care of all that, and also will address the length of material I need from the proper drip rail from this kit. And I was looking at it, there's a couple strange things. There's a hole right here, and I can only assume that was because it had the vinyl top on. I was looking at the other side, and even though it's not nearly as in bad a shape, there's a hole there, and there's one back here. So I can only assume it's got a little sealer in there. I can only assume that was for the vinyl top in some way. But I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing. Nothing serious to deal with, and should be able to take care of this pretty quick. So now I have the new piece cut off, and I found there are some variables here. The original, whatever width that is, if you compare that to the replacement one, there's quite a bit of difference. So I intend to trim off where I've drawn the line. Also, if I overlap these, the location for the cutout that is designed in the original is different than what's in the aftermarket. And then I also used the hole as a template location where I will drill my new hole. And I took a measurement from the edge from here to center and duplicated that. And I believe they make this long, this extra long, so when it slips in, it kind of bottoms out against the inside of the flange right there. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to trim it off and match what I had before. And the other difference I found is the width where the trim would actually overlap. You can see there's a difference. Now hopefully this doesn't affect what I'm doing. If it does, I'll address it later. But at this point, that's what I'm going to go with. Now in hindsight, it may have been possible to trim off this lip right here and salvage it and just build this piece and put it in and never have bought this piece. But without knowing how bad this was, at the time I was just gathering parts, and so without knowing how far this may have been bad, it just made more sense to me to do it this way. So if you're doing this, you may want to consider that idea of just fabricating this. It's really not much to it, and then if you can salvage that edge, cut it back and weld that to your new piece. But as it is, I'm going to go with what I have because I've already cut it off and it's available and it makes sense to me. So anyway, I've already treated the metal here, and of course I'm going to add some weld-through primer as I do this, and I will also use this as a template to get my where the spot welds were and replicate that as best I can. So let me finish prepping this and see if I can't get this in place. Alright, everything's in place. My measurements all check out. And so now it's just a matter of welding it in. Well, I'm going to say I'm done with it. Everything's welded in place, and if you'll notice, I actually welded some extra material on in a few locations here. The reason I did that is because of the width of the original trim, or original drip rail, is wider than this piece. So I'm assuming there must be a difference between the fastback drip rail and the coupe. So had I known, like I said before, I probably would have salvaged just the lip off of this piece and made the rest of this. So lesson learned. If you need to, you could probably do the same thing. If you can salvage that piece, make your own, do that. But at least now I know for sure that there is a difference between that, at least that Dynacorn piece, and the original that I had. And what I did is I took a piece of original trim that I had that is not going to be used. It's too out of shape from whoever removed it. And I was able to put it on, and I added enough material to where it would snap on and stay. So that's taken care of. Other than eventually re-seam sealing all that, which will come later. That's all I'm going to do on this. And well, at least I learned something, and I hope you learned something. And that's it. Thanks for watching.